Warning: the following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Legacy sequel series, Hot Takes with Billy Biz. And look, if you're going to do a reboot, you got to bring on the reboot general, producer Bill, right?
Oh, I'll take that title. I don't think anybody's referred to me as that before, but I mean, I would wear that with pride.
I mean, you're the captain of our rebooted ship. I don't know what's going to come out first, this or our new season of Reboot It, but it feels like we finally made the whole lap around where we can be nostalgic for ourselves, which is great.
You know, we must have achieved something, I guess, if that's the case.
So you were on way back in the day. We talked about Man of Steel. You probably are, I always go to Ed because he's kind of my Batman guy, but you're my Superman guy. So today we are talking about the 10 plus, I'm going to call it plus, 10 plus season Superman legacy, which is Smallville. I don't normally do TV shows because they're just kind of a beast, but this one has always had kind of, I don't know, I feel like there's a stigma around Smallville that it was that crappy CW show. But before we get too much into this, I was kind of surprised because I was like, who could do this one with me? And I was like, I'll ask Bill. I don't know if he watched it. To my surprise, you were very into this show, even arguing about it back in the day. So tell me a little bit about your history with Smallville. Were you looking forward to it? Did you know it was coming? Was it something you got into later?
It's funny. I did know it was coming. I remember watching the pilot on TV, back, and this was back in the days when we had to do appointment viewing. This was like you had to be there on the night it aired, and if you weren't, you had missed it. And this was one that I was super amped about just because coming into it, it felt like, holy shit, they're taking Superman seriously. And this is going to be like, they gave it the feel that this was going to be some sort of grand mythic take on like the origins of Superman, that untold story. I mean, this was before Batman Begins happened. And so this idea of like, we're going to go back and explore the uncharted territory before the hero was the hero felt so like mind blowing, especially on the heels of comic book movies kind of devolving into Batman and Robin with respect to you. I know you like that.
I get it.
But then starting to come back with like your X-Men and Sam Raimi Spider-Man. And it just, I don't know, this just gave me tingles of like, oh my God, are they going to make something Superman related as cool as those Raimi Spider-Man movies? And spoiler alert, they did not. But I guess my big hot take about Smallville is that it did so much right and so much wrong. Like it's just the maximalist take on Superman, which is maybe unavoidable when you do 10 seasons of old school television.
Yeah, let's get into a little bit about how Smallville even came about, because the idea to explore Superman's origins was not their first choice. Their first choice was, let's do Batman. And Warner Brothers at the time, this was in the year 2000, was like, no. Whatever we do with Batman next in the theatrical realm is most likely going to be some sort of origin. And Warner Brothers has always been kind of weird about Batman and TV. I don't know why, but it seems like they've always felt that Batman was too premium for TV screens for the longest time. But Superman had kind of this long, rich history of television up until that point. We're talking back to the George Reeves original, Adventures of Superman. And then, of course, I don't know how people feel about it now, but you cannot deny that Lois and Clark, the New Adventures of Superman, was a huge jumping on point. That was my jumping on point to Superman. I never really grew up with the Richard Donner Superman. It just wasn't a staple in the way that, Tim Burton's Batman was.
I mean, that's true for me as well. I think I came to Richard Donner's Superman later, maybe in my late teens when I started to really become a cinephile. And it's like, okay, let me revisit this movie from the 70s. But yeah, I remember Lois and Clark being appointment viewing when I was a kid.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of my first taste of a lot of it. And so they said, okay, well, how about you guys being Goff and Millar, how about you guys do Superman instead? So they went ahead and they did the pilot for what would become Smallville. Now, I remember this being a big part of the marketing at the time, and this could be me just kind of misremembering things, but I remember the kind of the credo of the entire show, no tights, no flights, was something that was out there. And I remember hearing, no tights, no flights, no interest. So I did not watch Smallville as it came out. However, after season, I believe it was 3 or 4. So in 2004, ABC Family, which would become Freeform down the line, but ABC Family got the syndication rights to Gilmore Girls and Smallville. And October 2nd, 2004, they did a 6-hour marathon of Smallville. For whatever reason, I was like, okay, it's on. I guess I'll watch it. They had the pilot, which at that point, I don't know, I guess for the syndication package, they had edited the pilot. It goes straight into the second episode with the Bug Boy. And
I remember that.
Oh yeah. It was great. It was like a pan up to the sky and then it pans back down to the kid's house. But anyways, I was like, okay, this show is pretty good. And I would watch it here and there on ABC Family. It wasn't until about season 5 or 6 years later that people started saying oh, hey, Martian Manhunter's on the show. I'm like, Smallville? And then I saw that iconic kind of, walk with the fire behind you shot of their version of the Justice League. And I was like, something must have happened between Bug Boy and quasi Justice League that maybe I should give this a second look.
I mean, you say something, so much happened.
So yeah, oh yeah.
I just to give my own sense of context.
Please, yeah.
So that was around the time when I started falling off of Smallville. And I think I'm a couple of years older than you, but when Smallville premiered, I was a senior in high school. And so 2002 would have been when season 2 of Smallville premieres. I'm in college. My college roommate and I, we ended up becoming best friends, and we roomed together all 4 years. And for all 4 of those years, Smallville was appointment viewing. But come about the 4th year of college, we started hate watching Smallville. We would watch Smallville just to Mystery Science Theater 3000 it, which was enjoyable in its own right. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is great for that. But there was a shift over those, call it 5 seasons. And yeah, right about the time that they had the iconic Justice League team up, I started to be like, you know what? Maybe this just isn't going the way I want it to go.
Fair enough. Season 4 with the witches is where I was like, okay, this is kind of weird. But, even then, so what happened was in the summer of 2007, I had a debilitating injury. A piece of metal cut my Achilles tendon in half. Oh. So yeah, I'm not getting up from that. And for whatever reason, I can't remember now. I was like, well, I literally can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. I guess this is as good as time of any is to, watch this show. So I bought season 1 on DVD and I was like, all right, we'll see how far we get with this. And it was the episode where the old woman touches Lex and he sees, this kind of dream sequence of him destroying everything. I was like, okay, I'm into this.
In the white suit, right?
In the white suit.
Yeah,
that's right.
Suit,
yeah.
Yep.
So the summer of 2007, I watched seasons 1 through 6 in about 3 months. And I was trying to think of, and I thought about this earlier today. I was like, I think part of the reason why I just grabbed onto that show is because I wasn't a teen at that point. I was 20 slash turning 21. Um, I was in a very vulnerable place. And this show kind of like makes no bones about it that it's very melodramatic. And I think if you come into it with any sense of cynicism or irony, and you do not buy into the earnestness of the melodrama, it's lost on you. But if you give yourself up to it and you just accept the reality and you try not to be, and I'm not calling you cynical, not at all. I'm just saying, like, I was so vulnerable that I almost felt like a teenager in a sense. Like I absorbed the melodrama and I got hooked on it. I think that's the key to Smallville, was like you were either on board with how earnest it was, or it almost kind of like was a put off.
Oh, it was Doe Eyes the show, right?
Yes.
Like half of the show was just they. And by the way, I remember listening to DVD commentaries, and they would talk about how they coined the term the Smallville close-up, where it was super soft lighting, and they would push in closer than you pretty much ever would on like a network primetime television show. And between Tom Welling and Kristen Crook, half that show was just them making doe eyes at each other. Just that soft crinkle of the brow, just that, I'm not quite sure what to say, but it's all in this look. And honestly, I always found that to be one of the great strengths of Smallville, because from a big picture Superman standpoint, I feel like the best Superman stories are an examination of like, what does it mean to be a good man in the modern moment? I think there's an ultimate vulnerability to Superman that you have to translate, which is one of the reasons why I really dislike the Zack Snyder version. That Superman is about trying to be better, is about trying to always do the right thing. And especially in his early years, like, what does it take to come to those conclusions? How do you become someone who always does the right thing? And I love that about Smallville. I think they embrace that from the jump.
So let's talk about the things like, so for me, I guess one of the things about Smallville is like, I feel like, to your point, there are about 3 or 4 aspects that I'm like, not only do I think this is great, I think to date, it's the best representation of XYZ thing. And I want to start with what I feel is like the foundation of what makes Smallville work, which is the Kents. I think Jonathan and Martha. Now, look, actually, let me pause this thought real quick. I forgot to do this off the bat. I had to do this on a handful of episodes, Superman included. Let's get the elephant out of the room right away so we can just talk about the characters in the show. There are some, especially since the show has ended, there's just some things about some of the cast members that have maybe cast a little bit of a shadow on the show.
To say the least.
To say the least. Look, there's stuff from John Snyder has some comments that have, been controversial, to say the least, some views that I certainly don't agree with. The actor who, I can't remember his name, I'm so sorry, but who plays Pete Ross,
Sam Jones III.
Sam Jones III had some felony charges. I think he did some jail time. And of course, the big one, which is, Kristen Crook got Allison Mack into the Nexium cult. She ended up being charged with sex trafficking, amongst other things. So this is, look, there's so much outside of the show that you could do 3 full hours on that. But for as best as we can, I want to separate the art from the artist and really just talk about the show. So I'm not going to get into Allison Mack and all her stuff or any of that. From this point on, we're just talking about the characters and the actors. There's plenty of other podcasts and shows that if you want to go down that road, but now we've said it, we can move on. So the Kents, to me, I don't want to rehash the Man of Steel episode all over again, but one of the things I was like, I loved so much about Man of Steel was like just seeing the action of Superman, because to that point we hadn't really seen it on screen. But the thing that always just kept me from like, I really like this movie, but I'll never be able to love it, is I just don't think that they nailed the parents. And if you can't nail down exactly what you said, how does someone who should be a tyrant, a god, get reined in? That's so fundamental. And even like, I've been rewatching the series lately, and one of the episodes, Clark is just kind of beside himself. He's like, maybe it says I'm supposed to lead through strength, but I don't know. And his parents, without being fearful of him at all, they never are afraid of what he could be. They're always just like, Clark, you can be whatever you want to be. You're in charge of your destiny. And I think that was what was so great about them, was they never treated him as if he was different in this show. You know what I mean? In terms of how they parent him,
I mean, I think both those actors, I think both John Snyder and Annette O'Toole kind of nailed the material they were given. And as a Superman fan, I got a little tired of their outsized presence in the show, just because in a lot of ways it ends up infantilizing Clark Kent, where it's like, good God, this guy really has to go and have like deep heart-to-hearts with his parents a lot. But also, like, that's the nature of what was at the time a WB show, and should be said, kind of set the template for what would become a CW show. But, outside of that more macro, like, yeah, I just don't like the idea that he's just constantly leaning on these farm people. I've always liked the idea that Superman is a little bit of a story about growing up as well. So it's like you just inherently outgrow not only the limitations, but really just the worldview of the people that raised you, because they can't relate to you in a lot of ways. And I don't think that's not a bitter or angry or necessarily even sad thing. I think that's just one of those core truths of growing up. And so the fact that they really bent over backwards to keep the Kents so primary throughout the show, I think was one of the things that, like, again, in the early seasons, I appreciated, and I think it was performed really well. But as the show went on, it just started to get a little bit like, can he not fucking move out of the house? Like, why do we have to keep focusing on these people? But again, it's a little bit of like, you're doomed by your own success, and I know Jonathan Kent ends up dying, but like, you go 10 years in a show, then you don't actually want to break the formula of what your show's about. You're going to get redundant. So I can't give them huge points off for that. But I do think that, like, I don't know, Jonathan Kent always having the answers in all circumstances and being just this unwavering paragon gets a little stale for me. And I do think that John Schneider, like, chewed that up with reckless abandon.
I mean, it's almost like, I feel like maybe you gave up on the show too early, because about season 6, 7 is where that shift starts to happen. Annette O'Toole kind of does. She doesn't fully leave the show, but she does leave the show. And it's like, again, you step back and you look at this big 10-year long kind of thing, and it's like, well, we do get that kind of, becoming his own man and not being, taking the lessons of Jonathan without taking the literal advice. But, look, you're right. On a week-to-week basis, I'm sure it can be a little bit grating.
Yes.
But to your point, that's kind of the whole show, right? I believe it was Goff and Millar who also said, like, we did the Lana Clark thing like 2 seasons too long. Like, going up through 6 seasons of will they, won't they, when as a viewer they won't, it's taxing. But I just think, like, go ahead, please.
No, I just on that point, I will say, and I'm sure we're going to get to it, but like, they pulled off a little bit of a miracle with Erica Durance as Lois Lane, just because by about season 3, yes, they had run through the will they, won't they, like, to the point of exhaustion, but also, like, the chemistry was so palpable between Clark and Lana, rather, the idea that you're both going to abandon that, bring in a totally new actress, and then have even better chemistry is like, that's wild.
Well, let's talk about Lois, because I think that's another thing that like really gave the show a second life. I mean, this show kind of had like 5 lives, and we'll talk about how the show has a clear transition point. But also just going back for a second to what you said about the Kents, which was the family values. Part of the pitch to WB was like, what if we did Seventh Heaven, but with Superman? So yes, that was very intentional in terms of like the paragons of virtue, which, look, you want a whole nother can of Allison Mack type worms, go down the Seventh Heaven rabbit hole. That thing is endless. But let's talk about Lois Lane, because I do think like, and this is I'll get some flack for this, but for my money, this is Lois Lane. No disrespect to Margot Kidder, no disrespect to anyone else. Erica Durance is so much Lois Lane that it's almost hard for me to like, she is the standard to which everyone else is going to have to live up to. And I certainly do not want to objectify her, but I will say she looks very young, kind of in those season 4, season 5 episodes. But the way she just ages like a fine wine and becomes this beautiful, mature, equal to Clark by the end of this show, like, I mean, that is the most ideal Lois Lane that I could possibly think of.
I would agree. Sorry if you're hearing a beeping in the background. I got a garbage truck outside my building, but I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I was blown away, and I think you saying that was sort of a second lease on life for the show is correct, because yes, they probably brought her in a little bit too late, but it changed things so dramatically. And it was also one of those things like, I don't know how much you were planning on talking about this, but this is one of my biggest memories of the show, was the whole Adam Knight storyline. Do you remember this?
Refresh my memory. I'm in the middle of a rewatch and Lois hasn't gotten there yet. So
okay, so it might have been concurrent with Lois showing up, but I think it was right before. But they had the dude from Vampire Diaries, whose name is escaping me, was also on Lost.
yeah. Oh God, yeah. This is where we started to get into the witches and all the weird. Right?
Yes, but so
Yes.
The reason I'm equating this to Lois Lane is so they bring on Ian Somerhalder, and he's playing this character called Adam Knight, and like he has every attribute that you would think a young Batman would have, right? He's mysterious. He doesn't talk about his past. He's a martial artist. He's very cocky and confident. He's even got the look. He's got the high eyebrows. And I swear to God, everybody was obsessed watching this in real time. Like, it's only a matter of time until they reveal that this is actually fucking Batman. And I remember, I mean, I was active on Smallville message boards at the time. Like, this was blowing my mind. And spoiler, it's not Batman. And they clearly were just fucking with you as the viewer, because they wanted you to buy into that being Batman. And then they're like, fuck you. And so that idea of like just anticipating that more threads from like Clark's future as Superman are going to start showing up on the show. I mean, I feel like that was palpable from season 1. And so the fact that they brought in Lois and didn't do a rug pull with it and actually committed, like, no, here we go, we're going to write a new version of the story and she's in it and she's awesome, was a little bit like, holy shit, something has changed. Like, that was a sea change in that show.
I mean, I guess that's where it's like, I never had the rug pulled from me with that, because if Batman had been on that show, I would have known about it before I started watching. Right. So when that season arc came up, it never even crossed my mind. Probably the same way a lot of people thought that eventually Chloe was going to have some sort of incident happen where we find out she's actually Lois Lane, or she changes her name to Lois Lane. So the fact that Lois actually comes, and by the way, Erica Durance's Lois Lane was only supposed to be a guest star. It was only supposed to be a short stint, but somehow they let them keep Lois. So part of me wonders if they're like, oh, did we bring her on too early? Because as much as I love Lois in that show, that first year was so awkward because she's older than them. And it was kind of this weird, like, oh, I graduated, but I still have credit. I don't even remember what they came up with, but it was so like, guys, just don't bring it up and we won't ask. How about that? You know?
Yeah. And that's where I feel like the show starts tripping over itself. And I mean, this is a long tumble once it starts tripping, but like, for a while, it seemed like they couldn't decide if they were just going to rewrite the Superman story completely, or if they were just going to play with everything and then reset it for, ostensibly the Christopher Reeve movie or some version of the comic book continuity where it's like, well, eventually he'll move to Metropolis and him and Lois won't have a relationship and she'll just buy that he's a bumbling nerd. And so like, again, watching this in real time where you don't know where it's all going, there was some excitement to that. There was some like, ooh, how are they going to get out of this? It was almost like mysterious. Like, how are we going to bring in Lois and then we're going to get out of it so that she doesn't recognize Clark later? And then like the more that they kept her around and tried to like figure out what their new status quo was, it did get a little frustrating. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, I graduated, but I didn't. And so I got to start taking classes. And then like, there was some other shit and I don't remember the exact specifics, but there was just so much, tail wagging the dog in terms of like, well, how do we justify this? That was part of what got grating.
It's easier to accept now in hindsight that there can be this Elseworld story of Superman where it doesn't have to go the way that maybe you traditionally would expect it to go, and I feel like it would have been easier to swallow. I kind of was hoping that that's the way they would keep it, and in fact, I'm talk about wagging the tail here. I'm getting ahead of myself, but one of my biggest like frustrations with the finale, the series finale, which I actually think was like perfect, minus this one thing. I'm just like, this was so sloppy, which was erasing Lex's memories. And like I don't know if you saw it later, like out of context. Okay.
No,
which is just like,
so not to cut you off, but like,
sure,
I will say at that point, I had not been watching the show as it aired. I think come about season 6 or 7, I really jumped off. I was just like, you know what? It's not for me anymore. But knowing that it was finally ending and sort of keeping up with it, the machinations of it online, kind of where it was going and where it wasn't, I came back and watched that finale when it aired because I'm like, well, I got to see this. And one of the things, again, I can't separate this from like my experience of it in a broader pop culture sense. Everybody was certain we're going to see him in the full Superman costume. And the fact that we didn't was probably my biggest frustration with that finale. But I hear you on the Lex thing.
Yeah, let's put a pin in the suit thing. We're going to get back to that because that is a big thing. But, for those who didn't watch or aren't sure, one of the biggest things I think to your point was, we were playing this guessing game of like, how are they going to have it that Lex and Clark are so tight for so long, and then they become adversarial that later on in life, like Lex would have to just know everything at that point. And in the season 7 finale, like Lex finally puts 2 and 2 together. Mm-hmm. Clark is an alien. He finds the fortress, blah, blah, blah. And in the series finale, Tess, who ends up being Lex's sister, she has some goo. It's literally like Nickelodeon, like sludge, like gack. And she puts it on his cheek. And she's just like, the neurotoxin. He's like, how long do I have? And she's like, seconds. And you watch his memories flash away. I'm like, hold on a second. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
That seems like a really important thing that Lex probably would have used a lot in the series if it just existed. And also, like, she had it on her fingers. So I'm like, how did you remember what it did to put it on his face? Either way,
well spotted.
Yeah, I just like, that was the only thing that was just like, oh man, like we had already rewritten so much of the mythos at that point of like Doomsday had already come and he didn't do what we thought he was going to do. He killed someone else, and Lois already knows that he's like super, so we don't have to play that game. Like, why couldn't you have just let Lex know and have that be an interesting dynamic for us to daydream about going forward? Instead, you wiped out all his memories. Now he's still going to become president. He's still in charge of Luthor Corp. But I'm like, how does he know how to wipe his ass or tie his shoes like this? He should not remember any, like he should have the intelligence of like however old he was, like 8 years old. It just made no sense.
It's a little bit like that Doctor Strange spell from No Way Home, where it's like, it just does whatever it needs to do. We're racing Peter Parker.
That was my only gripe, but that brings me to like the last thing that I think is like definitive about Smallville, which is, I think one of the things that always kept the Richard Donner Superman kind of at arm's length from me really embracing it was I loved everything with Superman. I disliked everything about Lex because it just seemed like a joke, and I just couldn't get on board with like, I don't understand this character. Michael Rosenbaum brought so many dimensions to Lex Luthor that he made it not like one of my favorite now villains.
Yeah.
And I absolutely was hoping we would see kind of more of that in Batman v Superman. We didn't. And I don't, as of this recording, the new Superman movie with Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor has not come out. But I just loved that, like, you felt for Lex in a lot of ways. This was a guy that got kind of like, not physically, but well, kind of, his dad did try to kill him. He got abused by his father emotionally, somewhat physically. This best friend, and all he wants is acceptance. And he knows that his best friend is keeping something from him. And his best friend knows that he has this question about all of these things and just keeps it like, there's so much hurt that the turn to evil makes so much sense. I just like, I don't know if you're going to get a more definitive take on Lex Luthor than Michael Rosenbaum.
I can't argue with that. I think, that to me was the heart of the show, even when everything else kind of sucked. And trust me, there were some episodes that were huge stinkers, but sort of not just charting the relationship between Lex and Clark, but also, again, from that standpoint of like, I'm watching this every week, not knowing where it's going, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting to start seeing the cracks where Lex is going evil, where he's losing control, where he's going to become the person that he is. For whatever reason, Rosenbaum was just able to play with that in a way that was so satisfying. And I would imagine remains satisfying, even if you're going to binge watch it and you haven't seen it before. But
it does, yeah.
One of the things that I remember distinctly, there's an episode where he just road rages on a guy, and he pulls out his fucking 9-iron or whatever from the golf clubs in his trunk, and he just wails on this dude's car. And I distinctly remember like giddily laughing and just going, holy shit, there it is, when I saw that the first time. And man, was that like just a really, I don't know, that was just one of the great draws of that show, was just, where's this guy going to go? How are they going to pull this off? And they, I don't necessarily love everything about where they went with it, but I will agree with you that they should have just embraced, like, look, Clark and Lex's relationship in this version is different. And like, we don't have to make him the comic book Lex Luthor, because from the beginning, he wasn't. Just the fact that they made him as sympathetic as he is, yes, in the Silver Age, Superman and Lex Luthor had, Clark and Lex Luthor, I should say, had a relationship going back to childhood. Although in the Silver Age, it was actually Superboy and Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor was a super genius, Superboy was a superhero, and they both lived in Smallville. Lex Luthor really didn't even know about Clark Kent in the Silver Age relationship. So, like, trying to take it more seriously and not do Superboy, they sort of had to change that dynamic. But obviously, that changes the whole dynamic between the secret identity and everything. So, yeah, I would agree that it is a little bit of a betrayal of so much of what they did well that they eventually just had to give Lex the Superman 2 mind wipe kiss, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah. And, like, the other thing that was just so great is John Glover as Lionel Luthor, a character that I didn't really know before this show. But
I believe they invented him for the show.
That would make sense to me, honestly. Yeah. But anytime those two were in a scene together, it was electric. Just absolutely electric. And one of the things that I did really like about the show, even though the machinations of how it got there was a little wonky, but you look at some of these early season 1, 2, 3 episodes where Lionel's just the epitome of just awful and evil. And here's Lex, kind of like he's still sympathetic, but he's still trying to get, like be an equal to his father. By season, was it 7 or 8, they flipped the script where Lionel now, as kind of a host of Jor-El.
I was going to say, he got like possessed by Jor-El.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, the machinations were kind of like, okay. But just the dichotomy, the switch between the two. You watch a scene from season 2 and a scene from season 7, and watching how they're both electric, but they're able to play the whole range of, like, the emotion. It's truly amazing. Like, the acting in this show could be hokey at times, but on the other end of the coin, it was just like, sometimes the acting was like, this is too good to be in a CW show. You know what I mean?
And I would say that the perpetrators of the too good acting are definitely Rosenbaum, John Glover, and Annette O'Toole, honestly. I thought that John Schneider could sometimes lay it on way too thick, but I thought Annette O'Toole was sort of, she knew when to come with the emotionality and she knew when to keep it restrained. One thing I will say about John Glover, he was essentially playing the comic book Lex Luthor.
Yes.
He was just an absolute narcissist of pure will with cunning intellect who would get his way no matter what, and sort of looked with contempt upon everybody who would try to get in his way, including his own son. And they made Lex essentially, I always found him to be kind of like Ryan Phillippe in Cruel Intentions. Like, he was this spoiled brat who was sort of playing at something beyond what he actually was. And again, for CW style drama, and especially for him to be being pulled by essentially the Machiavellian Lex Luthor on one side in the form of Lionel and Superman on the other in the guise of Clark, like, he was almost the heart of the show. Because there was never a question, well, except for maybe the red kryptonite stuff, but there was never really a question of if Clark was going to grow up to be a good man or not. But Lex was always the question mark. And so I think that's why Rosenbaum got more to chew on as an actor, because he was essentially the person caught in the middle of Superman and Lex Luthor.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say, like, Lionel was kind of the classic representation of Lex, because we saw that with a couple of characters. I'd say we also saw Lois well before Lois got in the show with Chloe. That was kind of our audience conduit to kind of this idea of the intrepid reporter. And poor Chloe, I say poor Allison Mack, but she got saddled with some of the hardest to deliver exposition I've ever seen an actor have to give in a show like that. And even sometimes I would roll my eyes, but for the most part, I'd be like, okay, I buy that. Like, it's not easy to deliver the exposition on some of this stuff, but she did it well. And I liked that character. I always felt for the first couple seasons, like I bought into kind of it's a love triangle, even though it's kind of one-sided, but
yeah,
I always felt so bad for her, that pining for Clark, and it just wasn't going to happen, you know?
See, that's interesting. I feel like more than anybody on the show, Chloe was the lightning rod character. And again, as part of being the fandom, like as it was happening, people either loved Chloe or they hated Chloe. You love Chloe for the reason that you just said, or you hate Chloe because you're like, this is just an unnecessary subplot. Like they want to have an exposition character, but then they want to make her relevant to the plot. But like Clark and Chloe is not a thing. You know, I know Superman, Clark and Chloe, nobody gives a fuck. Excuse my language. But like that, the whole idea was they're shoehorning in this Lois Lane archetype at a time when we don't need Lois Lane. And Clark is already in a will they, won't they relationship with a friend of his. Like, why do we need a second one? I got to say, that was more of my take on Chloe. And I also think, and I would go back to Lionel and say this as well. I think Chloe kind of poisoned the well a little bit in a different way than Lionel. And what I mean by that is Chloe crystallized the archetype of the guy in the chair, which like Spider-Man has now lampshaded with the Ned character in the Marvel Spider-Man movies. But like after Smallville, every single superhero show had to have the dorky best friend using their computer skills to be the guy in the chair, whether it's a man or a woman. And there was always a will they, won't they, romance thing. It's with what's his name, the Toy Man's son in Supergirl. Felicity became this huge lightning rod character in Arrow for the same reason. Obviously Barry and Cisco in The Flash didn't have a will they, won't they relationship, but it's like, again, you're just trying to give more story to this character that we all know is only there to be an exposition machine. And I don't know. I just don't know if that's a great precedent. If I was this show, if I was Smallville, I wouldn't look at that precedent and be like, hey, good for me, I did that. Because I think it's a little bit of a drag.
She did get powers for a hot minute. There were a couple seasons where it was weird, and it kind of came and went. I don't remember if she had them. But again, like, you have to remember too, at least going back to the early seasons, which is, I think, part of what made Smallville kind of what it was that they were trying to appeal to an audience that wasn't just comic book boys. So this idea of like the girl that could relate to the best friend, that maybe she wanted more, or she was, jealous of her best friend and the relationship, like that was, even if you kind of roll your eyes at that aspect, like it was integral to the show's success. And part of what I was saying earlier that I want to bring up now, which was they had, the teeny bopper audience, which was brilliant to go after for this kind of thing. But then there's a hard shift that happens at the end of season 6 into season 7, which I don't know if they did a market research, if they looked at something, but it's very clear to me that they realized the teen girls are not watching, like they're not watching this anymore. The teen boys aren't really watching either. The ones that are left watching are the comic book nerds. Yeah. So let's shift gears, and the show switches. Like it's palpable. You can feel it from teen drama to like the stuff that they ended up putting on there. I'm still kind of shocked by this day. Like listen to this list on Smallville that they had: the Toy Maker, Suicide Squad, Booster Gold, Blue Beetle, Dr. Fate, and the JSA, Darkseid. They were just like, you know what? If the teeny boppers aren't going to watch, let's at least give the comic book guys as much as we can give them. Doomsday, which was not good, but I at least applaud them for trying in their own way. So for Smallville, like, so I said, like, that was like its third lease on life, which was the second lease on life was like let's interject Lois. Then it was like, all right, let's interject comics. Like, let's just go deep as Warner Brothers will let us get into the DC playbook, you know?
And I think one of the problems with that, because that was, again, where I checked out of the show, is that they tried to have their cake and eat it too, because they were still committed to no tights, no flights, and this is going to be Smallville. Like, again, speaking from the message boards, which I was on at the time, everybody was like, just launch a new show, call it Metropolis, make it the Lois and Clark show. They're in Metropolis, and then do all this shit and make him Superman. Because then you got into this nonsense of like, well, he's the red, blue blur, and he's wearing a trench coat with the Superman symbol in black and blue on his shirt, but like, he's not quite Superman. And yet they're telling clearly Superman stories. And that to me was where they really started to lose me, where it's like, can you guys pick a lane? Like, you clearly want to make this a superhero show. Why are you still adhering to this rule from back in the days when you were making an OC knockoff? You know what I mean? Like, that's what bugged me about it.
That to me, that was all Tom Welling. You know, Tom Welling was the one that there's a bit of trivia. I hope it's true. There's a bit of trivia that you could frequently hear Tom Welling on the set muttering under his breath, "Clark is so stupid. Clark is just stupid." Like, there was a contempt for the character. And also, I have no proof of this, but to your point about the suit, I'm willing to bet that he just didn't want to put it on and do it. I think there was just something about it that and what's really fascinating is with the, you know, I think for a while Tom Welling interviews about Smallville were kind of, I'm not going to go as far as to say like flippant, but there was kind of just like he was very okay, sure. Yeah. He was always very clear about, like, to me, I never wanted to play Superman. I wanted to play Clark. It's all about, I want to play the character that has to find his way to get to be there. And then that's the end of the story I want to tell. And it's so funny because as time has gone by, you know, him and Michael Rosenbaum now have a podcast called Talkville. And you'd be surprised because they watch every episode and it's Tom who defends the storytelling and the show all the time. And it's Michael Rosenbaum that routinely shits on Smallville, which I thought would definitely be the other way around.
I wouldn't. And again, maybe I'm biased by being like an old school obsessive fan. Tom Welling, I think from about season 3 was done with the show. And there's behind the scenes reporting that like he became an executive producer and he directed a bunch of episodes and he got very involved with the behind the scenes of the show just so that the production could keep the show going, because otherwise he was ready to walk away from it. And you could see, you know, there in like the late aughts, the late 2000s, he starts showing up in more and more movies, but it's very much in like little tiny nothing roles, because at the end of the day, Tom Welling is not an actor. And like, he was great as young Clark Kent, but the apocryphal story, no, I mean, it's not even apocryphal. The true story is he was a struggling model that Goffin Miller saw a headshot of and gave him his first acting job on the pilot of Smallville, just because he looked the part. And I think from the jump, he did not want to be a superhero. Like, if you've heard interviews, he grew up as the cool kid. He was not into this shit. He wanted to have a bigger Hollywood career. And the reason why I say I'm not surprised that he's now taking that role on Talkville is because he never had a bigger Hollywood career. He didn't matriculate into anything. And frankly, his career has been snoozeville since the end of Smallville. And so now I think he's at a place where, like, I don't know that he's hurting for money. I mean, you can't become an executive producer, director, and the number one on the call sheet on a show that runs 10 seasons and, you know, be broke. You just can't. But I think he's just at a place now where he probably looks back and goes, God damn it, I should have put that suit on, you know, because it would have given him more life, I think.
I will say, so I started watching the show in real time, week to week, starting with season 7. By that point, I had caught up. And that's not to say like there were some points in like season 9 where like I lost interest, but never enough to stop. It would just be like at that time, I would have like 6 episodes on my DVR that I'd be like, all right, I'll wait for spring break or something, and then I'll get through them. And I always did. But by the end of the show, I never was disappointed with the amount of Superman in the finale, because I never expected anything beyond the last shot of that show, which was ripping open the shirt for the S. I was actually shocked that they very poorly CGI'd his head onto a Brandon Routh model of like literally I can point to the scenes in Superman Returns where they took the animation model. But even that, I was like, oh, that's all more Superman than I thought we were going to get on this period. So I was never disappointed in the amount of Superman in that finale.
You know, before I kind of give more thoughts on the finale, I feel like we should take a moment to talk about Brandon Routh and like the Superman Returns of it all, because Superman Returns was in production at like the height of Smallville's popularity. And that was complicated because I think not only did it drive Warner Brothers to be very protective of like what Smallville could and could not use in the context of their show, but it also really split the fandom, because here you had Smallville, you know, Superman Returns came out in 2006 and went into production in like 2004. Like the whole announcement, okay, Brandon Routh is our new Superman, Bryan Singer's directing, and look, it's going to be a takeoff, you know, it's going to be a quasi sequel to the Richard Donner movies. That all happens in like season 3/4, probably season 4 of Smallville. And that's when Smallville's riding high. And so in the fandom, the split between Routh and Welling was palpable. Like there were so many people that just were so resentful of the fact that they were not making this movie with Tom Welling in the Smallville continuity. And then on the other hand, this idea of like, holy shit, we're getting a big budget version of Superman also makes you go, well, why do I need this kind of like low budget hodgepodge that they're giving me on TV? And I feel like that hurt both of the things. And honestly, season 7, I think, is post Superman Returns, but the timing kind of works out that like, yeah, the split of the fandom was complete by that point. You know, there are people that were either now off and running, wanting Bryan Singer to make Superman Returns 2, and or being very invested in Warner Brothers rebooting Superman after Superman Returns kind of sucked. And then you just have whatever sort of core, you know, super invested audience there is for Smallville, but it's much smaller than it was before Superman Returns kind of came to take the wind out of Smallville's sails.
It's so funny because like I clearly was on the internet in 2006. I just like I never really saw the divide, and I just assumed incorrectly that most people were like me, where it was like, that's cool. I have my Superman show for, you know, well, I wasn't watching at that point, but it's like, you know, like in my head, I'm just like, they're different things, and it's cool that you can watch a Superman show all year and then go see a Superman movie, and it's a different story, different Superman. Like it's the whole like, are you PlayStation or Xbox? You got to be ride or die for one of them. So like I've never understood that mentality.
I kind of feel like we don't have that mentality as much anymore, because now we're sort of living in a post Marvel Sony world where it's like, all right, Sony's going to make Spider-Verse and Marvel's going to make the Tom Holland movies, and like they can both be cool. And now we just all get what the multiverse is. And like, yeah, sure, why can't different versions exist? It wasn't like that at the time. You would have been, people either would have called you not a real fan for thinking that way because you didn't care enough, or you would have been called, you know, naive in that it's like, well, no, pick a side. They should do one or the other. Like, what are you talking about? And
I mean,
again,
look,
I'm happy that that's not the case anymore, but that was the
right.
case. Even Marvel versus DC, like now that's not as much a thing. But I mean, when we were growing up, that was a huge thing.
Totally. And look, you know, in hindsight, being what it is, like maybe a Superman movie based off Smallville would have been a little bit better than Superman Returns. Who knows? But it was never going to happen. I do remember, because I was so excited for Superman Returns, and even though I wasn't watching Smallville at that point, I did watch. There was an episode of Smallville around that time where they're like, during this episode, we're giving an extended sneak peek at Superman Returns. So I do remember like tuning in specifically to see that. So like they weren't shy about promoting it and the fact that this was not going to be the same thing. But you're right, online, especially like fan forums at that time, it a lost cause, you know.
No, that was peak sort of toxic message board time. And yeah, like and it was also because we were eating scraps, you know, like the X-Men movies were kind of petering out. The Spider-Man movies, I mean, fuck, Spider-Man 3 was so divisive, and people were just like, holy shit, this is another Batman and Robin. This has killed, you know, this Spider-Man 3 is such a piece of crap that it's killed superhero movies now. Like, we did not see the Dark Knight and Iron Man on the horizon at this point. And so people were just really invested in like, no, you gotta get it right. So yeah, I don't know. I can't think about Smallville without it bringing me back to that time and that mentality, which I think is probably pretty strange for anyone that's sort of been invested in consuming this media post, call it 2008, because it was just very different.
I mean, I would argue even in the summer of 2007, like maybe it's because, you know, I'm a little bit more tuned into like the business thing, but like I knew there was not going to be a Superman Returns 2 at that point. Sure. I was like, you know, you could read the tea leaves on the box office returns, like that ain't happening. They'll do something different. But also too, kind of what I said at the beginning, which was like, I invested in Smallville more emotionally than I did invest it as a watching a Superman show, which is, I'm sure that's exactly what they would hope that I would do anyway. But like, I just never got caught up in the fanboyness of it. Strangely enough, like it was prime time for me to do that, and I just never did. I just kind of took it
Good
as
for
like,
you, by the way.
The amount of restraint I had for Smallville, and I think it was because I was just in such a vulnerable place. Like it was a symbiote that just latched on to me. That's like, oh, you're already feeling sorry for yourself. Here's some more melodrama to just sink your feelings into. So, you know, just like watching Smallville, listening to Coldplay, crying on my couch at Chloe's watery tear eyes for 4 months, you know.
Oh, dude, I could picture it. My eyes are watering for you right now, you know?
And then I just stuck with it. And I'm glad I stuck with it. There was a lot that I liked. I do feel that when Michael Rosenbaum left the show, it hurt. You know, they tried with bringing in Tess as like this bad guy, but even they were like, no, people like her too much, so they kind of switch her over to a good guy. And then Kristen Crook, they finally, you know, I think they finally just were like, we got to let this go. Like, it's almost her sticking around is hurting the lowest part of it, because you could see the chemistry between Erica Durance and Tom Welling, and you started rooting for them more. That like Lana almost became like, why are you still here? You're getting in the way. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And I actually love the way that they got rid of her. I don't know if you ever saw how they got rid of her.
I did not. How did that go, actually?
So through the most ridiculous of circumstances, Lana and this is where you could be like, I told you they shifted gears big time. Lana gets like this surgical nanobot suit put on her, so she is like indestructible like Clark. So they're able to have sex, which they do. It creates like a minor earthquake in Smallville. It's a whole thing. But what happens is Lex, even though Michael Rosenbaum had left the show, they had done this thing in season 8 where there was kind of a stand-in or a stunt double, and he was wearing like a Bane mask, and he's hooked to tubes because he's all messed up from the Fortress of Solitude falling on him. And he puts a kryptonite nuclear bomb on a building, and he knows that Lana can stop it, but the only way she can stop it is if her nanobites absorb all the kryptonite. So long story short, she takes all the, like, she stops the bomb, but unfortunately now she is permanently, like, Clark cannot get close to her. And so their goodbye is he goes to kiss her, and he just starts, like, you know, like the veins turn green, and it's like, it sounds so stupid as I'm saying it. I know it sounds
sure
stupid.
Does.
But it actually worked so great because it was like their goodbye scene. Honestly, like, look it up. It sounds stupid, but yet somehow they pulled off just their goodbye scene so great. But it gave it finality. Like, she's not coming back to, you know, like, it's time for him to move on, and that's when I feel like the lowest stuff really ramped up big time. But yeah, like, it was as comic booky as it gets, man. A nano suit that absorbs kryptonite, you know?
I kind of hate that. And it's very Silver Age, but I don't know. For me, and maybe it is just investing so much in like the Donner movie and sort of extrapolating that in my own head. But like, I have just always felt that Lana Lang, as a function of the Superman story, is part of the thing that he needs to grow past. Like, in my own headcanon, which is my own, but it's like if Clark Kent at 18, 19 years old would be ready to marry Lana Lang, right? Like, I love this girl. I grew up with her. She knows me. I'm, whether we stay in Smallville or not, like, this is the person that I need. But the more and more he opens himself up to the world, it's like, oh, she needs me in a way that I can't commit to. I am now, I have a higher calling. I have a bigger purpose. I am at not the beck and call, but like, I am of service to the world. And this small town girl with her small town mentality about two people being in love, it just ain't it. And so, like, to me, it goes back to that idea of Superman being a metaphor for like growing up into a good man. Lana Lang, as callous as it might sound, is part of the thing that he discards because he knows that doesn't fit into his idea of what he should be doing. So to hear that reduced to like this absolute nonsense science fiction plot with Lex apparently wearing a Bane mask and tubes, I'm just like, come on, guys, what are we doing? Like, that's
I think
so
at that
disappointing.
Point, like, the only reason why I think you couldn't do, I mean, yes, I totally hear what you're saying, and from a realistic standpoint, it's absolutely right. I think, though, that when you toy with them for 7 seasons, you almost, like, you have to find a way to, like, physically keep them up. That's one of those things where it's like they wrote themselves into a hole. And if Lois had never come onto the show, I would have been like, just change the mythos for this then. Let Lana be Lois and just be done with it, because you've already changed so many of the other things. But it's like, at that point, like I said, like, I feel like the audience was starting to turn on Lana. Like, she wasn't even a series regular by that point. Like, she came on for a stint because it was like you had fallen in love with Erica Durant, and you knew that's where his heart ultimately was going to go. So anytime that Lana came up, you're just like, this is a waste of your time. It's very frustrating.
Well, it was also, it was also a huge burden on his own character development. And maybe I sound like I'm contradicting myself here, but I remember as early as like season 2, again, watching it in real time, like screaming at the screen because Lana was always, Clark, you're lying to me. Clark, I don't know if I could. She always had some reason why she couldn't be with Clark, even when their chemistry was off the charts. And it was like, yeah, just freaking date each other, man. Like, what are we talking about here? You're high school kids. Start going on dates. But it was like she was always throwing a monkey wrench into things, which was just how shows were written at the time. But the longer I'm talking about season 2 right now. By the time that's still happening in season 7, it's like, kill her off. Get her out of there. Like, stop making this dude. Honestly, and I think this was one of the biggest frustrations I had with Smallville. It just seemed like, oh man, I'm powerful enough to save the world, but Lana. And like, that was the show. And obviously there was all the Luthor stuff that was going on, and he had the great relationship with his parents, but it often felt like the major dramatic crux of the show was, but Lana. And like, that just got worse as the show went on. So,
I mean, it works in the beginning because it's the Spider-Man formula, right? Yeah, which is, it's I'm a hero, but I can't get my personal life together. But yeah, look, like I said, the showrunners even are like, we went way too long with that, but we didn't really know where this was going at that point. Because you have to remember, from a business sense, they're on the WB. WB gets folded into, now it becomes the CW. So, shows that were hits like Supernatural and Smallville, still their features were a little unclear for a minute there. So, I don't doubt that there was kind of just like, do we wrap this up? What do we do with that? But yeah, okay. The Lana stuff, yes, but there was one kind of aspect, you said like, well, shows aren't really written like that anymore. There was an aspect of this show that I kind of don't see as much anymore. It could be because I'm not watching these types of shows, but this was in the heyday of Monster of the Week.
Freak of the Week, baby.
Freak of the Week. But by season 3, they start to kind of like get more season-long story arcs. But certainly at the beginning, I will say, now being able to look at the whole thing as a piece, one of the things that the show added, which I absolutely love and would love it if it became kind of more ingrained in the origin of Superman, I love the idea that Clark coming, or Kal-El coming to Earth, is not this little teeny isolated incident that they found a spaceship and that was it, and it was a normal Wednesday for everybody else. I love the idea that a lot of death, a lot of destruction, and ultimately, like the freaks of the week come from like Clark brought this with him. I just thought that was such a cool idea. And even though she kind of like lets it go later, the idea that like Lana lost everything because of Clark was such a compelling kind of secret to have at the beginning. Now I'm with you in the sense of like, I'm rewatching the show right now. I'm on season 3. I'm like, you have to be brain dead to not think that Clark's secret is at least that he's meteor infected. Like, come on, like, give me a break. But ultimately, like, I love this idea of like Clark's coming to Earth is kind of a bigger deal than it is maybe in other interpretations.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more brilliant kind of mythos building aspects that they created for the show, was the meteor shower. And the fact that, yeah, all right, if he, whether he goes through a wormhole or whether he's just traveling at, superluminal speeds and it gets sucked into his wake, like, a bunch of kryptonite's going to show up at the same time as his ship and it's going to crash to Earth. And in this continuity, it is some sort of a mutagen, which is fine, like, especially as a formula for a television show. I think it unfortunately plays into the trope that you see a lot in Superman stories, which is like all of his biggest threats, the writers just always want to tie back to Krypton. So it's like the animated series did this in a way that was really brilliant and worked for the animated series, where like Brainiac was the ruling AI on Krypton. But it's like the more you start stacking all that stuff up on each other, the more it's like, God damn, Superman just shouldn't have come to Earth. Because it's like, Brainiac comes from Krypton. General Zod and the Phantom Zone villains, obviously. In Smallville, he brings all this mutagenic radioactive waste that creates these super freaks that go on rampages. It's like at a certain point, you kind of want the threats that Superman fights to not be threats that Superman himself creates. But again, outside of that larger context, as a formula for a TV show, it's brilliant. It really is.
I mean, some of them work better than others. The one that always makes me laugh is a very young Amy Adams. Adams, yes. It's just like, oh my God, the liposuction Kryptonian drink one. I'm just like, I would have loved to have been in the pitch room because they're like, okay, what could these meteor rocks do to someone? So it was like Slim Fast.
Wait, doesn't she eat a deer in that episode?
She does. She eats a deer and a couple of classmates too, I'm pretty sure.
I don't know why the roadkill is weirder to me than the cannibalism, but I have a distinct vision of a young Amy Adams bent over, like a prop of a dead deer with blood smeared on her face.
It seems very A24 if you were to tell someone out of context, But they move away from Freak of the Week later on. But just as a general thing, I really like that about Smallville. Just kind of looking at my notes here. So it's like, look, one of the things, especially now, I'm rewatching this on Hulu. So it's in HD, which, like I said, I watched the DVDs back in the day.
Yeah.
Oof, like, it's CW graphics. You just got to get over it because sometimes, oh, mama, they are bad. But at the same time, that's an interesting thing. I want to get your take on this. Warner Brothers always so reluctant to put Batman on TV, right? But they always jump at Superman, which to me is just like, that seems way harder because Superman is super powered with aliens and all this stuff,
It's so ass backwards. It really is. And I think if you look at the animated series, it bears it out. Whereas you can tell an unlimited number of Batman stories in episodic TV format. He's solving crimes. He's going after corruption. It's like anything that could happen in a city, in a James Bond movie, in a hard-boiled detective movie, in a spy movie, whatever. Every single one of those stories functions perfectly with Batman in it. Superman, not only do you need to actually visualize his powers, which even at the low end, right? Even at the George Reeves end of things, he's still busting through walls and taking bullets to the face and stopping cars with his bare hands. And then on top of that, in the modern era, to make a Superman conflict compelling, you need something that has world stakes. Forget the special effects of it all. You need to constantly come up with a new version of this entire city is going to be destroyed. Millions of people are going to die. The continent is going to be shifted. It's not the same way that Batman is sort of infinitely renewable with hey, you know what? A guy gets mugged on a street corner. That's a Batman episode. It's not the case with Superman, and I don't know why that keeps happening.
I mean, it could just be like I said, they view Batman as very premium. Although they did Gotham, in 2014, which did not have the appeal that Smallville did. Certainly didn't have the longevity, and they did the same kind of roadmap. Instead of focusing on Bruce, it does focus on Commissioner Gordon, but the last shot of that show is Batman, finally seeing Batman. So they tried to go back to that well, but it's by that point we had the definitive origin in Batman Begins. It's no one else really should try a full origin story of Batman. Move on.
It's interesting. I mean, also, I think if you look at the history of these shows, they come at a time where Warner Brothers can't get their crap together in the features. So Smallville comes on the heels of Tim Burton's Superman Lives falling apart, right? So you had the cratering of superhero cinema with Batman and Robin. Tim Burton was going to come back and make Superman Lives at the end of the 90s, but that falls apart. And so I think when they start Smallville, it's almost a little bit like, yeah, who cares? Give it a try, because they just know that they're not going to make a movie work. And I think in a different way, when Gotham starts, Nolan had just wrapped up the definitive superhero trilogy of all time for anybody's money, right? And at this point, Warner Brothers is a little bit running around with their heads cut off because the MCU was also in full go. And they're like, God bless it, we can't get Nolan to come back and make more movies. And okay, so he's, we have Man of Steel, but like that didn't have as gangbusters of a response as we wanted. And like, who's going to be our Kevin Feige? Their hair's on fire, and all they know is like, well, we're not going to rush a new Batman into production because Nolan just delivered the greatest trilogy of all time for their money at the point. So it's like, all right, sure, let's take a flyer on this, Commissioner Gordon origin story. So I wonder if these shows don't just come from the fact that like the features department is a little bit just giving them the leash to be like, sure, why not? Try it. I don't care.
I mean, to your theory too, like the Superman show that just finished up with Tyler Hoechlin as Superman is coming off the heels of like, are we done with Cavill? Yes, no.
Yeah.
What's happening with the DCEU?
Yeah.
And of course, WB or Warner Brothers still panics and puts in a Ben Affleck Batman a year or two after, Gotham anyway, because they're just like, well, we can't do just Superman. We got to do Batman too. So yeah, it's very strange. But the plus side of like Superman getting all this TV time is that I feel like every Superman show has kind of had a different flair and a different feel. Lois and Clark was very much a kind of a sitcom, a more like as a kid, I remember the Superman aspects of it, but I watched it again recently. I was like, oh, like Superman is very secondary to the story. I just didn't realize it as a kid,
Yeah, he would barely show up. Like that was very much in the mold of like a Moonlighting or a Cheers, just, straight up just coasting on the chemistry of the two leads and the comedy between them. Yeah.
So, I think with Smallville, I'm able to, like you said, we were just like, it was scraps. And it was just like at that time. But now there's just such a gluttony of all of these things that like it almost makes me appreciate Smallville more, because it's like it's not the end of Superman. It's not the only Superman thing. It's just a different avenue. And it's one where they did more, you said like extreme rights and extreme wrongs. For me, there's more rights. There's one wrong. There's one more that it's just like, it's so minor, but I just like, it may be the only time during the run of the series where I was like, nope, that's dumb. Like literally said it out loud as I'm watching by myself, which is they tried to do the Doomsday thing. And I was like, they're not going to kill Clark, obviously. So I was already like mentally like, I'm game for whatever you guys want to do. And at that point too, like that was probably the best looking Doomsday that we had seen at that, and
it was comics accurate-ish, sure. Yeah.
But the thing that was just like, nope, which was they killed off Jimmy Olsen. Yeah. And at his funeral, you find out, no, it's not Jimmy Olsen. It's Henry or Harry James Olsen. And his little brother was like, what the fuck is this?
Wild stuff.
What is this?
And that again goes back to the point we were talking about earlier, where it's like, oh man, we got to fit this square peg into this round hole of like our continuity versus the traditional Superman continuity.
Well, it's funny because Aaron Ashmore went on Talkville recently and talked about, like, did you know that this was going to be a thing? He's like, yeah, their whole reasoning was that like, well, Jimmy has to be younger than them. And I'm like, I mean, sure. But at this point, like so much, like he is a little bit younger than them, like not a whole lot, or you could argue either way. Like Aaron Ashmore was just like, whatever, like, sure. I'm getting paid. I'm not going to, but it just, that was the only time where I was just like, that was a horrible, horrible idea. I feel stupid for having invested in that character, not knowing who they were. And it made me so happy that they didn't go with those fan theories that Chloe would be Lois, because I'm like, oh no, it actually really sucks when you pull the wool out or the rug out from under me and it's not that character actually. Like, nope, never mind. That sucks a lot, you know?
Yeah, it does, and that specifically does, and the general idea of it does. So there's two things I wanted to actually talk about with you that haven't come up yet. One of which is Christopher Reeve. So I don't know.
Yes.
I don't. Have you seen that yet in your rewatch?
Yeah, he actually comes on a couple times, but the first time was like the big one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I bring that up because first of all, I think it was. I remember it was a very classy move. It was very much appreciated at the time, and I think now in retrospect, with Christopher Reeve having passed, like it's even more. I don't know. You can look at it very fondly, but they made a place for Christopher Reeve. And frankly, it was a role that I think the series itself really needed, which was how do we give Clark a mentor figure that's outside of just his farmer dad? And, you know, I made this point earlier. I think that's really important. I think that Superman needs to graduate to mentor figures that have a little bit of a broader perspective than just his dad who grew up on a farm. And having Christopher Reeve come in to play a scientist who has expertise on Krypton because he's been studying these artifacts and studying what he can of it for all this time, I think that was a really cool move. I think that was slick and smart and heartfelt on their part, and I always really appreciated it.
And you know, he did a quote later on that he was like, I was skeptical of Smallville at first, but then being there, seeing what they did, like he fully signed off on Smallville. That character was also important because I was like, how long is Clark just going to call these, you know, meteor rocks and, you know, like how are we going to get past this? Because it's a little dicey. So for someone to just be like, this is what it is, here you go, and you don't have to invent anything else, like normally I'd be like, oh, that's cheap, but like it felt earned in a way. And it comes back later with the whole Veritas Society and that they were expecting the Traveler. So yeah, it was great.
That was the other piece of it, at least the Christopher Reeve piece of it, that I wanted to talk about, that I think I somewhat resent Smallville for, is I just hate the version of Superman where like him coming to Earth is some kind of big plan.
Prophecy.
Yeah, like prophecy is even beyond the pale. But even just the idea that like, oh no, Jor-El had sort of like scouted out Earth and maybe he's even been here before.
Top 5 worst episodes, but that's the episode I'm on currently.
Oh,
and man. I'm just like, this is so bad, but I digress.
No, I mean, that's basically all I'm saying is like, I think that Smallville did a lot to normalize the idea that like Superman is fulfilling some sort of Harry Potter-esque role that, you know, his parents and possibly other people had sort of planned for him, when really the more kind of heart-stirring version of it for me is like, our planet's about to die and we're throwing a Hail Mary, not even like half expecting that this kid is more than likely going to die in space. But even if it's like a 0.001% better chance than dying in a horribly fiery death here on Krypton, like we will give our child that chance because we're hoping and praying. We're throwing a message in a bottle. I feel like that means so much more because it's not like Superman is trying to live up to some vision that somebody has for him. It's like, why am I here? What is my purpose? Your only purpose, man, is to live. The rest of it is up to you. You got to figure that out.
I could see both sides, honestly. The reason why I feel like it worked okay in this one, and a move that initially turned me off, but in hindsight, I'm like, oh, that was kind of interesting, is, you know, especially when you think about those Kawachi caves and like the first couple seasons and pointing to this godlike figure, and Jor-El, who typically we think of like Brando or something as like a guiding figure, becomes an antagonist.
Yeah.
And so we're pushing this idea that maybe Jor-El thought that he would be seen as a god, and this would be a god thing, and this is kind of another way of embracing his own kind of writing his own destiny, as opposed to becoming kind of this all-powerful god. I don't know, but I feel like in that context it works because Jor-El seems like such a cockface. Like,
well, yeah,
he's so mean,
No, and honestly, you are right, and I don't know if I'm remembering this, but don't they retcon that in some way, where it's like, okay, so to be fair, Terrence Stamp, who is obviously the Richard Donner version of General Zod, coming back to voice Jor-El and then making Jor-El ostensibly a villain, I thought was a real ballsy move, and I was into figuring out where that went. Like, I was in for that. But don't they end up making it something like the consciousness, like the AI consciousness was corrupted, and like his real dad wasn't actually a bastard? Was that? I don't know.
I'd be remiss. Like, I'll let you know in probably 2 months
Okay.
if that's right. But I will say, like, part of me wants to say no, only because like this all comes at like a tough love type thing, and I know even once the fortress is created, like, Clark goes there a lot in the later seasons just to argue with Jor-El. But by the end, because I was scanning through the finale, he's like, "Oh, I see what you were trying to do for me this whole time." Like, really? Because you got branded like a cow, with like this really painful looking thing for a while there. So I do think like it works in the sense of like Clark finding his own destiny, not taking over Earth, and ruling through strength, as it says on the cave walls. But it does like I'll have to go check the tape, but it does kind of make it seem like Jor-El just must at some point just be like, "This is what I meant all along,"
Right. Yeah. Well, and so I guess to that point, the other thing I just wanted to ask you about is, did you think any of those superhero guest stars worked? And I think specifically I'm thinking of the first batch, because yes, we eventually get like Jeff Johns, who was, the head writer at DC Comics for a long time, wrote the JSA episode where we get like Dr. Fate and Stargirl and these other characters. But that initial sort of proto Justice League was Alan Ritchson as Aquaman, which, by the way, still good casting, was Justin Hartley as Green Arrow, and then somebody as Cyborg and somebody as Flash. But it was like the Bart Allen.
It was Impulse.
Yeah.
And it was rest in peace. I can't remember his real name, but the guy who played Jet Jackson on Disney Channel was unfortunately he committed suicide, but he was great. I think that it's a mixed bag, right? Like I actually really loved Justin Hartley's Green Arrow. I totally understood that they wanted so badly for that to be Batman, and it is written exactly like Batman, but it can't be Batman, and I'm okay with that. And that was the character that actually, once he's on season 6, he stays for the duration of the show.
Oh, yeah.
I felt like that scratched the itch of there are different ways of justice and different ways to fight this fight, and Clark needs to find his way, as opposed to the way that Oliver was doing it. Alan Ritchson, I have not watched anything he's done. I know he's in a new show that's very popular, the Reacher or something.
Reacher.
He is so awful. He's so terrible in Smallville that the couple episodes that he was on, I was like, just don't let him say anything because he's terrible.
He had a real Dolph Lundgren thing going on in his early career.
Yeah, so terrible. I didn't really have an opinion of Cyborg or of Impulse either way. Calling him Impulse and having that version, kind of like, I was like, you're free to kind of do whatever you want because you're not Barry Allen, you're not Wally West. And at that point in time, I only knew Cyborg from the old Super Friends cartoon. So I didn't really have like a barometer of what that character was supposed to be, other than I knew who he was. So they all serve their functions well enough. Obviously Green Arrow carried a lot more, and he did a lot more, but would I like to have seen their version of Diana and Bruce? Well, you did. If you, I don't know if you ever read the Smallville season 11 comics that they did.
Yeah, I'm aware of them, but I never read them. Actually, part of me wanted to do that before this episode. I just didn't make the time for it. But yeah. Oh, look at you! You got an issue right there.
I got the trades. If they had gone that way in the show, I'm like, I don't know if I would have liked that. So it's really hit and miss, but it's just cool to see them. Like, to my knowledge, there was no Aquaman or Cyborg kind of live action representations before that,
No, I mean, definitely not. I think mixed bag is a good way to put it. I think that Justin Hartley was really good in that Green Arrow role. I also think that it was, again, frustrating watching it in real time in the moment where it's like, just make it Batman. What are you doing? But then by the same token, you could also say that really created the template for all the CW shows that we ended up getting, which were built off the back of Arrow, which itself was built off the back of, hey, what if we told this story, but we just essentially made him TV Batman? So there's a pretty prestigious lineage that you get just from that Justin Hartley Green Arrow. I think one of the reasons why that started turning me off at that moment in the show was like, okay, you guys are going to give me the most watered down versions of all this stuff, where it's like, and I think Impulse might have been the worst offender, but that famous scene of them in front of the fire, all walking in a straight line. It's like, if you actually take a step back and again, especially at the time, step out of, oh man, these characters I've never seen in live action, they're doing it. You're like, man, these are some wooden ass actors in some crappy ass costumes with some horrible special effects. And it's like, that's not what I want,
I get it. Does it change? Do you think it would have changed anything if you knew down the line kind of where we would be with, especially Marvel in terms of just like at comic book accurate things, If Avengers Endgame had happened at that point, you'd be like, well, maybe DC will get the, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's a two-sided coin because even at the time, I think it was probably a promise of things that could come. Like, okay, there is so much to be mined in DC Comics. And like, yeah, you can put stuff up on the screen that we've never seen before. But yeah, I mean, if anything, like seeing more diverse, and not like racially diverse, but just more diversity of material on screen in different forms, everything from kind of Marvel's more militaristic to Marvel's more, comic book accurate costumes and everything. I think it might have made me more frustrated because it's like, all right, if you're going to give me Aquaman, don't just put him in like a green and orange, surf suit, like put him in a costume. So I don't know. I still think
you have to remember the times though. Like, I think if this show had been running in 2020, honestly, to me, like that first Avengers movie was the one where I feel like it was finally like, okay, we can put people in the costumes that I mean, they still really haven't gotten there with Batman. We are still in the it must be all black. They did it a little bit in that Flash movie, but it was like weird, and they couldn't commit to it all the way with the blue.
No, it did not look good.
Yeah, it was the strangest bat suit I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But I applaud Smallville for at the time, for 2006 to even try to get people to care about Cyborg or Dr. Fate, to me, I guess that's the coolest thing about Smallville is like in a vacuum in itself, like it was, they tried a lot and not a lot, some of it really didn't work. Some of it did, but they were able to take what should have been this teeny bopper seventh heaven with a superhero and do their best to make it something more. I do think, kind of to put a point on all of this, it's like I think that it earned its place in the mythos of Superman. It's not something that, like, to me, it's different than like that Superboy show that they had in the, was it late 80s, early 90s, whatever it was, where it's like that
Gerard
kind of
Way.
wanted to, that to me was just like, no, this isn't it. But Smallville, I kind of feel like it earned what it was, and I appreciate, it makes me appreciate the character of Superman more, because it is like, well, what would keep him from just becoming the worst possible version of everything? And it's like, this is a very, very long, drawn out thesis of like, well, here's all the steps that probably took him from just a kid who maybe was even too reliant on his parents, to a hero at the end. And I don't care who you were, if you watch that finale, you are pumping your fist like hell yeah at the very end when he's on the building and that American flag's up there and he takes the glasses off and he rips the shirt. You're just like, oh my God, the sense of euphoria that can't be matched by a lot of things.
Listen, just hearing you describe it right now gave me a little bit of goosebumps. Like, and I was out, I had been out of watching the show for at least 3 seasons at that point. And like I said, I came back, I watched it in real time. And yeah, it's a beautiful way to end the show. It's a little bit sad that they're finally giving you the thing that you've kind of been wanting them to give you for at least 5 seasons at that point. But hey, that's business, baby. Like, it is so beautifully executed. It does leave you wanting more in all the best ways. And it is a perfect encapsulation of like, okay, if we're just going to take it that these past 10 years have been what you just said, his journey to sort of outgrow who he was as a child and become the man that we know he's supposed to become, what better way to symbol that? To me, that's always been what the shirt rip has symbolized. Like, I'm going to literally take off my weaknesses, take off my failings, and show you just the shining thing that I am underneath. And there was no other way to end it, but they delivered on it beautifully.
Yeah, it could have gone a lot of ways, but even now, like every now I don't know if it's still there. There was a guy on YouTube that went kind of viral for his running commentary over the last 30 seconds of that finale. He was just like, oh my God. Oh my God. Yeah, before fan reactions were like a real thing. But yeah, I miss Smallville in the sense of like, now if a superhero show comes out, it's tied into some big continuity, or it's something like Penguin where it's very serious, and that's fine. Like that is what it is. But like a show like Smallville, I don't think that's going to happen again. Not in like even like, well, the CW is definitely not what it was, but there's no real like teeny bopper outlet like that, because teeny boppers don't really watch TV like that anymore.
That's true. It's such a product of its time, right? In a lot of ways, we can't go back again to just being that naive and innocent about superhero shows. It was writing its own formula. There had really not been anything like that. The idea of, we're not going to treat the superhero aspect as just like fun window dressing. We're actually going to try to tell a tale about a superhero. Nobody, whether it was the Superboy TV show, whether it was Lois and Clark, nobody had actually tried to do that in live action. So it was making up the formula as it went along. Nor are we ever going to go back to that time where it's like, it's the perfect synthesis for me anyway, and probably for you. I also watched the OC religiously. Like, I was into the teeny bopper drama, if you want to call it that. And the idea of like, let's take this thing that's a real cultural force and introduce this other thing, superheroes, that like are going to become a huge cultural force. And we kind of don't even know what Pandora's box we're opening when we combine this chocolate and this peanut butter. Like, you couldn't know it at the time, and I don't know that we could recognize it now if it was happening, but a part of me is like, I just don't know how you would ever get that magic back. Like, it was so of its time and place.
I think for me, especially doing a rewatch of it right now, the thing that's most refreshing is like I said at the very beginning, to kind of bring it all the way back home, it's the heart. It's the lack of cynicism. This show does not have a single drip of cynicism. It is incredibly earnest. And any time that there's a major misstep, or any time that some, first appearance of some superhero or supervillain lets you down, the heart is still there at the end of the day. Like, it still makes you feel good. It still, to me, is like one, I won't say the best, but I will say one of the best kind of representations of the heart of what Superman should be. There's a hopefulness, and it never ever tries to be cynical, and never ever tries to be ironic. It's just it's earnest, and I feel like we've lost that. Even Marvel, I kind of feel like it kind of veers these days a little bit more cynical and ironic than my taste sway. But yeah, Smallville is something that because it's 10 seasons, I don't revisit it often. This is kind of my first real rewatch that I've had since it kind of wrapped up, but I've really enjoyed watching it again, and I hope that I really hope that this new Superman coming out in a few months now reinvigorates a love for Superman, because this is a character that's kind of at a crossroads at the moment.
Look, I think in a lot of ways, as Superman goes, so goes the culture. And I think that, I'm not trying to put more importance than is due on Superman. In a lot of ways, I think it's a two-way street, right? Like, the people who create Superman are often trying to meet the moment of the culture. Because Superman is the archetypal hero, it's always this question of like, well, man, what does it mean to be the ultimate hero in this time and place? And I think that, we got a little bit lost in the morass of like just the power fantasy of it. And the one thing that makes me hopeful, and there's a few things that make me hopeful about the James Gunn movie, but the one thing that really makes me hopeful is that he does seem to, not just visually, but thematically, be invested in embracing a lot of the tone of All-Star Superman. And if you want to talk sincerity, if you want to talk not a hint of irony, if you want to talk asking the question that I started this with, what does it take not to be a superhero, but just a good man in the world in which we're living? There is nary a better Superman story to pick than All-Star Superman. And so I hope that is what that movie does. But I would agree with you that you get heaping helpings of that in Smallville.
And if you're a big fan of Smallville, I do recommend just checking out the season 11 comics. It might scratch a little bit of itch. They do, spoiler alert, walk back a little bit of that Lex memory wipe. So even there, like, maybe that wasn't the best idea. Also, if you're a big fan of the show, I would recommend listening to the Talkville podcast, because it's very interesting to hear your two leads talk about their time on the show. And it's, from my understanding, this is Michael Rosenbaum's first time watching this show. So it's very interesting to hear him be like, that sucked.
Honestly, Rosenbaum is a great podcaster. I was listening to his podcast, Inside of You, that he did for a while, which was just sort of a straight interview podcast. But he's a very thoughtful guy. He's a very open and vulnerable guy. Like, I love listening to him talk. I have not tried Talkville, but I know that I've listened to the Tom Welling episodes of his other podcast, and like, they have a great rapport. So that actually sounds like something maybe I should put into my own routine.
I mean, they were trying for a while to get a Smallville kind of season 11 or some sort of reboot as an animated series.
Yeah.
I think the James Gunn DC stuff maybe kind of put that on ice. But we don't need it. I think you shot your wad on Smallville, like, let's move on to something else. But thank you, Bill, for shooting your wad on Smallville.
Maybe I will shoot my wad on Smallville all day long. No, honestly, like, look, I am a diehard Superman fan, and like, Smallville is just one of those things that if you're a diehard Superman fan, you have to have a take on it. You can't be a diehard Superman fan and just be like, oh yeah, and then there was Smallville, but it's whatever. No, it's too big for that. So I'm glad that we got to really get into it here.
a good chunk of my life dedicated to Smallville, and hopefully a good chunk of your life is going to be dedicated to listening to the rebooted Reboot It. I'm so excited. Like I said, I don't know if it'll already be out by this point. Can we say when our first new episode is going to drop? Can we say it here?
I mean, sure. Are you going to release this after?
I have no idea. So
right.
if not, you've already watched it. It's on May the 4th. We're going to be doing a rebooted version of just Revenge of the Sith. But it's been so fun just to be back with you guys. We waited too long.
Look, we all went through life. Like there was,
we went through our own Smallville journey, and now we've become the men we were supposed to be this whole time. So thank you so much. You can catch us on the new Reboot It. You can catch new episodes of this for, I don't know, as long as I have the interest in doing it. But it's been fun to be talking again, and I will see you guys next time.